Today I'm speaking with Neri Life-Choma. Based in Silicon Valley, California, Neri, she, her, is a mother, veteran childbirth educator, birth doula and doula trainer, and the founder of Birth Coach Method. Neri is celebrating 20 years of leadership in the field of childbirth support after serendipitously finding her way from academia to the world of birth in her native Israel soon after the birth of her first baby. Throughout her career, she's been honoured to provide doula support and teach childbirth education classes to hundreds of expectant couples, as well as to direct and manage programs at 2 birth resource centres. Neri's work with parents has been enriched by continuing her education and becoming a transformational life coach, hypnotherapist and NLP practitioner. She has integrated principles and strategies of all these modalities of care into birth support and shared it worldwide with birth support professionals in her book, The Art of Coaching for Childbirth. Neri leads the international community of transformational birth support coaches who enroll in her membership program, and she has students all over the world. I hope you enjoy listening to our conversation, and you can connect with Neri via the links in the show notes. Welcome to the Whole Doula podcast. The Whole Doula podcast is a conversation space for doulas and birth workers to talk about the diverse paths that led them to birth work, as well as the diverse and unique skills, interests and offerings they bring to their birth-keeping roles. Here I dive into conversations with others who may be wondering how to bring the different aspects and experiences of their own lives into their roles as doulas in business. After all, there is more than one way to doula, and I'd love to help others see the connections between all the different parts of themselves, to see themselves as a whole doula. I am your host, Neri Giordano, doula, birth educator, counsellor and doula business mentor, and this is the Whole Doula podcast. I hope you enjoy listening. Thank you so much for joining me, Neri, on the Whole Doula podcast.
Of course, I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so maybe you can just start by introducing yourself with how do you refer to yourself, if you refer to yourself as a doula or if you have a different title and who you are in the birth landscape.
I am a seasoned doula and childbirth educator and a doula trainer. I am also the founder of Birth Coach Method and the author of The Art of Coaching for Childbirth, which is a new framework to support birth givers and new parents, integrating transformational coaching into the field of birth support.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. I'll come back to that in a little while to ask you some more about that. And I'd like to know how you came into the world of birth to start with. What sort of brought you to this area of work where you've been for quite a number of years already?
I think that it's similar to many doulas because I'm a doula trainer and I love talking to my students, like kind of like having a one-on-one discussion with them before they join the program. And I know that so many of us came to the field following our own experiences. Mm-hmm. My first birth, when I gave birth to my oldest one, like 28 years ago, I thought that it was a terrific birth because I didn't need a cesarean. I didn't need any medical interventions. I gave birth at a birth center. I mean, like everything was checked. All the boxes were checked, everything that I wanted. Mm-hmm. And it was surprising to me to discover less than 2 years after, like when I was already pregnant with my second one and nearing my second birth, it was very surprising for me to discover that there was a trauma that I didn't even acknowledge. No one did, mm-hmm. including myself. And the way that I found out about this is that I started having panic attacks mm-hmm. When I was thinking about my nearing birth. And that was very, very surprising to me because, I was thinking I'm functioning well. I didn't know there was any trauma there. And so I asked my best friend at that time, she was doing Reiki and Bach flowers and some massages techniques. So I was like, she was my best friend from elementary school and she lived nearby. And I said, well, how would you feel joining us for the birth? And we didn't know the word doula. There was no word doula, not in the dictionary, definitely not in Israel. Mm-hmm. And she said, really? And I said, yes, I kind of feel like I want you with me. You've been taking such good care of me during this pregnancy, nurturing me, empowering me as a woman, as a birth giver. And I feel like I want you there. And I invited her to join me and my partner And it was at the same birth center, and this birth was miraculous. And of course, being a birth professional, I know that the second birth of a mother is usually the fastest one. And it's definitely a different experience than the first one that takes time. But it was miraculous in so many aspects. And not even that got me into being a doula. What actually got me into being a doula is the look at my husband's face after my friend left the room, going back to her kids that she wanted to go and send to school. And he was looking at me and he said, "What the heck were we thinking the first time?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "In all honesty, I don't think this is a man's job. I mean, I love you dearly. I want to have the baby with you. I want to be here for you, but I cannot do what she did."
Oh my God.
And she wasn't even a doula.
Did you ask him what was it that she did? Was he able to articulate that, or have you spoken about it over the years?
We spoke about it. He said that there is something that goes without words. Just the fact that there is another woman, that her touch is different than his, that her reading of my body and my needs is very different than his, that he doesn't know how to really relate to the sensations like she was relating to the sensations and understanding them. And he felt like she was all the time one step ahead of him in terms of understanding what's going on and what I need.
Anticipating your needs. Yeah.
And when I came back home, when I was released with my baby, going back home, of course, the first thing was my dear friend came to visit. And it was just like we looked at each other, and it almost like we knew this is what we're going to do for the rest of our lives. We didn't have the word. We didn't know the name. We just knew, right from looking at each other's eyes, we knew that, this is what we want to do. I was on my way to my PhD, by the way. Like, I left the academic world. I left everything, just pursuing this presence. I call it presence because I think it is just really a presence on earth, in our world. And we were lucky to find an Orthodox Jewish woman who was from Kansas. She didn't speak Hebrew at all. She spoke English only. And she was practicing within the Orthodox Jewish community in Jerusalem. And she was associated with the same birth center where I gave birth. And somehow it came to my awareness that she was actually leading the first course and program in the birth center in Jerusalem, but she didn't call it doula yet. So the word was not there yet. She called it childbirth assistant. And it was a year-long program. And we had to give 100 hours of shifts in labor and delivery, supporting birth givers side by side with midwives, because in Israel, we have only midwives and not L&D nurses, like in the United States. And even though I was a mother of 2 babies, by the way, I had a baby that was 2 years old and then newborn, and I was still nursing. And I just, I drove to Jerusalem to this program. I knew I had to do it. I just knew that was my calling. I had to do it.
There's a lot there to unpack. That's really a beautiful story. Thank you so much for sharing.
And we're both, by the way, doula trainers. She's also doing this in Israel.
This is the friend who attended your birth, you mean? She's also,
yes.
Okay. So are you business partners, or are you have your own businesses?
No, not at all, because I'm practicing here in California. She's in Israel. It's so far away, but we're soul sisters.
Yeah, so beautiful. I love how you talked about just the presence and the simple presence, and how she was able to anticipate your needs just perhaps more instinctively and more effectively than your partner. And I see that a lot as well in births. I'm really mindful when I'm attending births to make sure that the partners that I'm supporting are also empowered and feeling that they have a role and so forth.
Yeah.
But there's something, women often say to me that there's something about the touch that I provide that's just different, or there's just something about it. And it's such a simple presence for me. And I often feel like I'm not doing much at all, but it's so meaningful to them. And there's, I think, as you said, most of us in this work have had a calling of some kind. And so we're hopefully working in a really strong alignment, I guess, with something else that's greater than us even, which makes it easeful for us to just show up and be present, and just through our presence offer so much comfort and reassurance for family. It's hard to actually put words to sometimes.
It's so hard. There were many things. I was really fortunate, really, Mary. I was so fortunate that my teacher, my trainer, was an Orthodox Jewish woman who knew so much about Judaism and the Torah and the Bible relating to birth.
Mm-hmm.
And she taught me such juicy things about what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I get a chance to talk about it in my doula trainings because I never know how people will connect to this. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that, both of us using the word presence many times, right? Being present for someone else, and this presence of doulas. And I remember her saying at the very beginning of the first lesson, she said, she was introducing actually the word doula for the first time I heard it. And she said, so a doula is the Greek word for a woman who serves. And I have a question for all of you. Who do we serve? And it was so clear to all of us. Oh, what do you mean? We serve the birthing mom and her partner. And she said, no, that's not who we serve. We serve the presence.
Okay.
And I'm not a religious person at all. I'm not going to synagogue even. My synagogue is a labor and delivery, I guess. Mm-hmm. But it stuck with me. It stayed with me, And when I teach, I tell my students, the most important thing is not if you remembered this item or this little item, or maybe you forgot about some position that would have been or could have been really meaningful in helping in this moment. But it's not about it. It's about your presence.
Mm-hmm. So your friend said that we are here to serve the presence. I'm just wondering if the interpretation that you understood of that is that we are, I'm just trying to sort of understand that in my mind, and wondering if it means that we are serving what is, or serving what the unfolding story is, and being present for sort of that, and helping to bring the family's awareness to what their unfolding story is, and surrendering to that rather than controlling that.
It can be that, but it's also can be the fact that we are serving a higher purpose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Something that is higher than those hands-on with the massage technique. Mm-hmm. Something that is a lot higher than that.
Yeah.
It's a moment of creation. Mm-hmm. New life is coming to the world. There must be something that is higher than just us, That's how I took it.
Yeah. I've never sort of thought of it in that term before. We're here to serve the presence, but in terms of there being something higher than us, I very much agree with that. And I've been feeling more and more into that, particularly in the last 12 months. And I sort of understand that there's a higher power of some nature that's orchestrating things. And to me, that is a sign that I'm on the right path, because even something quite peculiar happened. I was at a birth the night before last, and it was a woman whose water had ruptured 6 days earlier. So it was quite unusual for her to have had such a prolonged time of ruptured membranes. And there was pressure for induction and all sorts of things. Anyway, eventually she went into labour. And as you know, when you're on call for a birth and somebody's in early labour, or they've ruptured their membranes, and we're sort of on the edge, ready to go for days and nights, and looking at our calendars and what's on tomorrow and what do I need to change. And I always just sort of play it one day at a time, because we never know when birth will actually unfold. And so I just wait until the day. But when it became clear to me, I dealt with Friday's appointments and Mondays and Tuesdays. And when it became clear that birth was actually happening, and I realized I've got 2 podcast conversations booked in for the following day, and I thought I've got to postpone them. And within half an hour, those 2 people actually cancelled their own bookings and booked on different dates. And I didn't have to do anything. And I just thought,
you see,
wow, it's just, it happens all the time, all of these little things. And to me, it's just this big sign that's like, yeah, somebody else is looking after this. You don't have to worry.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All those years, I've been doing it for 24 years. I've been asking myself, how is it that when my girls used to be younger and I was, concerned that if I'm booked for summer deliveries, what am I going to do with the girls? There's no school,
School
there is no
holidays.
afternoon program, what am I going to do with the girls? Every time that I started thinking like that, the universe somehow heard me and there were no clients.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
No one was hiring me.
Mm-hmm.
Nowadays, I don't have this anymore because my kids are grown up. We're actually just this year became empty nesters.
Oh, wow.
And I don't have those thoughts in my head anymore. And I'm fully booked for the summer, right? There is some higher energy, higher presence that we're serving here. I saw it also during COVID. I saw how doulas had some assets to bring to the table when it came to just pushing through fear, pushing through the unknown, accepting that we're vulnerable. I thought, oh my God, doulas are so equipped with that. And I even led a Zoom, asking doulas, hey, this is our time to shine and serve our communities. We have something that we have like a set of skills and strategies that no one else on earth have. But doulas, because we're doing it all the time.
Yeah. I'm not overly familiar with the maternity system in the US, and I imagine that it possibly varies from state to state as well, and also the way that doulas are received and respected might vary from state to state also. Did you find that a lot of doulas were able to continue supporting families in person during COVID, in your area at least, in California?
In my area, there was, at the peak, at the very beginning, when everyone was hysterical, we couldn't go into L&D, of course. They shut L&Ds. I myself had one or two experiences where it was very clear in our prenatal conversations that I'm not going to go into L&D because my client said that they want their partners there. So if you can have only one person, that means the partner, not me. So the decision was, I'm going to come to your home. I'm going to support you. I'm going to be with you. I'm going to be your doula. I'm going to go with you to L&D. And then we'll try to get there as at the last moment as possible, but then the two of you are going to go in. I'm going to stay here. And then at the very last moment, I had this thing of two of my clients just looking at the partner saying, I'm sorry. I apologize. I need Neri with me. I want Neri with me. And the partner said, no, whatever it is you want, And I was just going into L&D. The first one, I didn't even know that it was going to happen. So I didn't have any clothes, to change, didn't have any food with me, didn't have anything. Like I thought I'm just leaving her there, right? And it was so nice. The nurses were taking such good care of me. They were feeding me. They got me some clothes to change. They were so sweet. I was very touched.
That's great. I think you're saying L&D, so for Australian listeners, I think that's labour and delivery. Yeah,
labour and delivery. I'm sorry. Yes.
No need to apologise. In Australia, we just refer to birth suite once you get to hospital.
Yeah, we were restricted at the very beginning for a long time. I would say we were banned. Doulas in the United States were banned from labour and delivery for a long time.
Yeah, it was the same here actually for. I think up until even relatively recently, it may be still that there are some hospitals with restrictions in place.
Seriously? Wow.
I'm not sure because I'm not familiar with all of them. I'm obviously only really sort of paying attention to the ones that are relevant to me, but some had very conservative approaches that really went on for a long, long time. So it was really challenging. Luckily for me, I actually got some exemptions and was able to support people as a second support person for several births during the worst part of COVID. They were mostly women from cultural and linguistically diverse backgrounds. And so I have a particular interest and skill set in that area. And we were able to get exemptions, which was great, and had some really positive births as well in that time in hospital. I just wanted to circle back a bit. So you talked about before how you were introduced to the world of birth when you were still living in Israel. And it was a calling. So I think you mentioned that you were working in academia prior to that. Is that right? I'm just sort of curious.
Yeah.
What were you doing before that? What was your interest or career path that you
My
had?
educational background, actually, it's funny. My educational background is in film and television. That was my bachelor degree. And at that time, the department was trying to get more academic accreditation so that they can have money for research.
Mhm.
So they took a group of students that were more on the theoretical side, more interested in research and study, less in producing films.
Mhm.
And they just send us to work on our PhDs in different departments that had different angles, like history department and philosophy and literature. And we were sitting there, but actually researching the movies and the cinema.
Mhm.
So I chose a program for cognitive science. So my PhD was supposed to be in cognitive science. Of course, I never submitted my PhD because my calling was at another place. So I just submitted my master's degree. I took whatever research I studied, and I told the professor, no, we have to make it thin. We have to make it into a master's degree. I need to be out of here. This is not my calling.
Wow. Do you think that there's anything, although your calling was changed, is there anything from that previous area of work that interested you that you've brought into the world of birth?
Absolutely. Absolutely, 100%. I think that the academic background prepared me to do what I'm doing today in terms of creating programs, because that's what I do. So creating my doula training program, creating the transformational birth support coaching program and leading it, and creating all the presentations and the master classes and the webinars. I don't think that without the academic training that I had and writing a book, so I published a book. All of this got me to where I am. Everything. Absolutely.
Yeah. Beautiful. So the transformational birth coaching, I just wanted to touch on for a moment. You shared that you went through a career crisis as a doula after 15 years of practice, which is what led you to reinvent your practice and reignited your passion.
That's true.
So I'm just interested, before we hear about the transformational coaching, could you share a little bit about the crisis that you had in your work as a doula and how you came through it?
I'm going to try to talk about it without crying, because every time that I talk about it, I start crying. First of all, the manifestation of this crisis was that I got pneumonia after supporting a birth that was very traumatic in terms of the amount of abuse that I was witnessing. So it starts with that. I mean, like, I definitely can relate, connect this sense of pneumonia and not being able to breathe with the fact that I couldn't just scream what I felt, in the room. It was an extremely traumatic experience for me. The doctor that was in the room was just abusive. There's no other way to describe it. Every little moment that he was coercing the client and saying things that were unheard of, even when the client was sitting in the tub and breathing and the lights were dimmed and everything was quiet. And I just gave her partner some time to be with her in privacy, and stepped out of the bathroom, because I think doulas should, respect those moments. This doctor came in a moment after the husband is going out of the bathroom. He's pale as the wall. And I'm like, what happened? And he said, well, the doctor was telling us that if we're going to delay the cord clamping, it could lead to amputation of one of the limbs of our baby. And I was like, what? That's unheard of. How did he even get to this crazy idea? It was really a terrible experience. And I became sick and spent some time in bed with all that experience. And while I was in bed, I had some soul search around what happened, about how I feel about my profession. When we're in time of crisis, sometimes it's an opening.
And a necessary time for reflection as well. Your body became unwell because of it, I imagine, in part because you needed that space to reflect, and perhaps you wouldn't have stopped otherwise.
I guess you're right. Yes, a crisis is an opportunity. Every crisis. So I took this time, and I realized that for the past 2 or 3 years, I've been serving clients, but I was actually very discouraged and I wasn't well. I wasn't at the same place that I was when I started my career, where I was so passionate and so optimistic and so confident in what I have to bring to the table, in what I am bringing to the table, in this toolbox that I acquired as a doula, and in my ability to change the collective awareness around childbirth. And all of a sudden I had to admit to myself that I'm not at that place anymore. And I asked myself, so what has changed? Why am I not in this place? And the answer that came was, well, we weren't successful. We had to admit that we weren't successful. We had so many years of childbirth education. We had doulas since the 80s. And I became a doula in the 90s. And now we're already, 15 years after. And C-sections are, oh my God, like the rates here in the United States, there were some hospitals with 43% cesarean rates. I was more and more challenged at the gap between what my clients were hiring me for, what they told me that they want, and my inability to lead them to the finish line, to lead them to this experience because of all the medical interventions that were on the rise. That was very discouraging. It was extremely discouraging. I was thinking, well, sometimes I think about it. I didn't really only fell in love with each and every client of mine that I worked with. I think that I fell in love with the profession, with the presence that we started talking about.
So fell in love with the presence, maybe, or the higher power, or the mystery.
With this presence on earth, with what it means in terms of the collective awareness around birth. I fell in love with the profession, with the promise that we can create a change. And I was very discouraged. We didn't really do that. We weren't very successful.
We being the doulas at that time.
Doulas, childbirth educators, all of us together, everyone who was in birth support and gave their heart. If we had to zoom out and look at the world and see where did we come, look at the situation, look at our reality. I had to do something to rewrite our reality because it wasn't working.
It's a very it's a challenging thing to realize, isn't it? That despite all of the effort and despite all of the knowledge and the positivity and confidence and the the assertiveness and confidence of our clients, despite so many things, the reality is that for people birthing in the system, there are systemic barriers that remain there, and there's only so much that we can do to support people. Just a little break from our conversation to let you know that I'm currently working on the Savvy Doula, an intensive business program for doulas to help you up-level your business acumen to ensure that your dream work is not just fulfilling your heart's calling, but also sustainable and financially viable for the long term. The Savvy Doula will be launching early in 2024. To express your interest, send me an email at hello@nerigiordano.com.au or connect with me on Instagram at nerigiordano.com.au.
And there was something that we don't talk about enough. I started my career serving the X generation. The birth givers that I supported first were the X generation, just like myself. In this time, I was already supporting millennials. They are very different than the X generation.
That's really interesting. Can you tell us a bit, what's the biggest difference that you noticed?
Well, one thing is millennials are relying on technology a lot more than the X generation, on the input that comes from technology. So they were very receptive, to the input that came from all those tests. They wanted more and more reassurance. They wanted more and more technology. They embraced technology.
So more and more reassurance from external sources rather than from inner compass. Yeah.
Another thing that I talk to my doula students actually a lot about is that as an X generation, we did have hormonal contraceptives, but they did not eliminate the period. So like when I started having sex, the pills, the hormonal contraceptives, they had 21 pills. Then you had to take a break for a week. And in this week, you got your period. So you had a monthly practice for birth. Like your boobs maybe got, big and engorged, kind of like, and you were having cramps, menstrual cramps, and then you experienced yourself bleeding, you had discharge, and bleeding. And so kind of like a monthly preparation. Millennials, they have hormonal contraceptives that totally eliminate the period.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Right.
In the United States, they use contraceptives. I was shocked when I went to the pediatrician with my kid who was 13 years old child. The doctor asked her if she got her period. She said, yes, I got my period. The doctor said, well, do you have any pains during your period? My daughter said, yes, I have some cramping. And my mom is giving me a hot pack sometimes, and so and so. And she said, well, does it happen that you can't exercise at school? At the gym, my daughter said, yes, when I'm on my period, sometimes it hurts so much that I'd rather skip. And she said, well, you don't have to. I can put you on the pill. And I was like, what? And then, I realized, so many girls are going on hormonal contraceptives that totally eliminate the period. They don't get their period ever.
They don't have that practice at all. Yeah. That was actually, I was in a similar story to your daughter, but I think I'm a different generation, but I was about 12, 13 when the doctor did the same to me, and my mum didn't really know any better and didn't know that it wasn't in my best interest to be on the pill for the following 10 years. And it was something that I'm still coming to terms with the implications of that. But the one that I was on did have 7, I don't know if they're just sugar pills or, there were still 7 pills to take in that week, but you could skip them if you wanted to skip the period.
Exactly. Yeah. But you did get your period.
If I didn't skip them. So if I let the week pass, but if I wanted to skip it, I can't even remember now, I think, because I stopped taking them a long time ago. If I just skipped that week and kept going with the next cycle, then I wouldn't have gotten a period. Well, anyhow, it's just, with all this introspection, I was actually reading a lot because I was trying to understand what happened. How did it happen? How did it happen that there was so much more knowledge, first of all, because of technology, because of the internet, there was so much more knowledge out there for expectant individuals to be knowledgeable. There was like so much knowledge out there. They have Dr. Google, Dr. YouTube, and Dr. Facebook. so much knowledge and so many different providers. Birth doula, postpartum doula, childbirth educator, they're prenatal yoga teachers. They have good support system with professionals. Nevertheless, a huge increase in interventions and in experiences that are not so healthy. I think that the Listening to Mother survey in California from 2018, that was, whoa, it showed that 75% of all birth givers in California agree that births should not be interfered with unless necessary. So what does that mean? Yeah.
But only 5% of them give birth not having a major intervention. So we're not talking just putting an IV in, we're talking major intervention.
Only 5% of women in California?
Only 5%. So this gap between their understanding and what they know and what they believe and what actually happens in their reality, that's a big gap, right?
It's a huge gap. I don't know what the stats are here for that in terms of what the belief is of people being supposed, be able to have normal intervention-free births. and, the actual statistics around intervention. But there's a big disparity there as well, I'm sure.
Do you experience it in your practice, in your own practice?
I'm just thinking about that. I support probably half and half home and hospital births currently. And with the hospital births, I'm just thinking, I've just had 2 super, super positive hospital births in the last week, which have been quite unusual. Like a mum had a water birth after cesarean last morning after 4 days of ruptured membranes. And then another mum, that was a second-time mum, and then a first-time mum had a normal, rapid, positive, beautiful intervention-free birth after 6 days of ruptured membranes, which was also highly unusual. And they did both come to face with some pressure from the hospital and some fear-mongering and so forth, but they were both so informed and steadfast in their beliefs and wishes that they pushed through that, and they had incredible determination and still got really good births. But I do see a lot of instances where women don't get the births that they want. So I do see a lot of people birthing in hospital as well, who I've sort of come to believe that to a degree in hospital, there are things that we need to understand if we're choosing to birth in a hospital environment, whether that is because we feel we have no options or not, and whether that may be just that we choose it to be. What I've learned in my 5 years of practice, which is not as long as you've been in this industry, but I'm very forthcoming and honest now, and I don't tell people that I can protect them from the system because I don't believe that I can. But and also I'm not attached to the outcome of people's births, but I'm really big on them sort of taking full responsibility if they choose to go into the system, that they are responsible for that. They are responsible for their own advocacy and their own determination and their own education. And I think, unfortunately, there's a pretty big piece there that's luck. I feel like luck plays a significant role in the way that births play out. But for the most part, the births that I support in hospital, I think, are generally positive experiences for the people that I support, irrespective of the outcome. But certainly there are just instances where, I don't think the gap is so huge in the people that I support in terms of preparing for hospital birth and actually having a birth that's somewhere along the lines of what they want. But they are people who are quite well supported because I'm there, or anyone, a doula is quite well supported, but it's still a small fraction of the population that are being supported in that way. And so I'm not seeing the women who aren't being supported by a doula. So I'm not really sure what's happening in the room next door. But the way that I see doctors interacting with my clients who are very well informed, I realise if they're sort of speaking to mums and families who are not that well informed, it would be just so easy to completely railroad their experience and sabotage it. So, obviously huge systemic problems in, I think, all of the developed world and elsewhere around birthing in public and even private hospital maternity systems. So your crisis led you to switching your focus from supporting families to supporting fellow doulas and developing your transformational birth coaching. Is that what it is? Maybe you can just tell us a bit about that.
Yes. Well, first of all, this crisis led me to the idea that I'm done. I'm quitting. I'm changing career. It is not for me anymore. And at that time, I also had my third baby, actually. And I was also co-directing a birth resource center here in Palo Alto. So it was a good time to wrap up this chapter of co-directing the center for 2 years and then stepping back a little bit from taking birth. I already did that and served very little clients because I had my third baby, and I decided I'm going back to studying. So the first thing was I enrolled in a year-long program to become a transformational life coach. I also, during this year, enrolled in another program. While not even finishing this, I became very curious about ways in which we can take a detour and help people to reprogram the way they think about things so that we're not going to experience those barriers to people, limiting beliefs, success blockers. How can we go around them to help people rewrite their reality? So I became very curious, So I started transformational coaching. I started to become an NLP practitioner and a hypnotherapist. And I had a very good rapport, and felt like a close bond with Dr. Rosie Kuhn, who was the head of the transformational coaching program. And a few times she felt that I was in agony, criticizing myself, reflecting on my work as a doula, regretting not having better strategies.
Mhm.
And she said, look, Neri, everybody is doing the best with the resources available for them. I'm sure you did the best. And it's not going to help you much to look back and think, oh my God, if I only did this, if I only did that. I mean, this is not serving you. You're just coming really hard on yourself. I don't see a lot of growth in this. It's not a process of growth. So what I would like you to do is try to make this process a growing process and not something that puts you down and full of regret and pain about things that happened in the past. And I wasn't aware that this is what I was doing, by the way.
Mhm.
It's good to have a coach that notices things and can
Mhm.
just project, and reflect and helps you realize what you're doing. And then when I realized that, she said, why don't we make it into a growing process? I would like you to take notes. Every time that you think, you might have done things differently if you just had those transformational coaching strategies, I would like you to just sit down and write. How would you do things differently?
Mhm.
Instead of looking backward, let's just sit down and write it.
Mhm.
How are you going to do things differently now that you have those transformational coaching strategies? How would you lead a transformative conversation with a client now that you have this around different topics, instead of just beating yourself? Make it into a growing process. And I took her advice and I started writing lots and lots of writing around all sort of common challenges that we doulas encounter when we work with our expectant individuals and postpartum clients, and all sort of common challenges that they go through. And I started just writing, what kind of transformative conversation I can help lead around this that will actually lead toward a transformation. So what I realized was that I was engaging in lots of conversations with my clients before, but those conversations were very informational rather than transformational.
Mhm.
So an informational coaching is creating an increase of knowledge and understanding.
Mhm.
But a transformational conversation is leading a change of behavior, a change of perspective, a call to action, accountability, an increase in accountability, increase in level of performance. So it's different process.
Mhm.
And I started just writing down and it became a book.
Mhm.
So all those writings that I did throughout this year, and she said, I'm going to accept this as your final paper for your program. And I said, yes. So I invested even more in this and took the models, the coaching models, and integrated them into our work. And it became a book. And then I thought, well, now it's time for me to train doulas. I want to train doulas that will work with those skills. Because here's the thing, what I discovered in my own, so it's almost like I wanted to go out of the field, but I was so passionate about supporting birth giver that this growing process got me right back to birth support.
Full circle.
And just reignited my passion. And here's what I realized. It was so incredible. I didn't even know it was going to happen, but I invested the time. Yes, it took more hours. So it wasn't just like 2 prenatal sessions with a client. It was more time spending with them around this transformational process as they're preparing for the birth. But it was so worthy of it, because the time that I spent with them actually in labor and delivery was 30% of what, average was 30% of what I used to deal with it. So there was a reduction of about 70% of the time. And actually, I had some clients giving birth without me, being so well prepared, calling me at the last moment. I was shocked to discover that. That was not what I was aiming for, But this process ended up with me shifting and transitioning to spending a lot more time prenatally with clients, making sure that their mindset is different, that they're very well prepared in terms of their mindset, their concept, their knowledge about themselves, removing their success blockers. And then boom, the births were so much more healthy and so much more faster. And then I realized, you know what? I think that I found something. I really think that I'm onto something, and I really want to give this new approach to doulas. And so first I became a doula trainer and started training doulas here in the Bay Area. And then it was time for me to say, well, I felt like, okay, so I'm training doulas in this way, but what about all the other doulas that didn't come through my program? What if they're also interested in integrating transformational coaching exercise and approaches and strategies that I keep developing? What if they're also interested? And so I started, just going online on Facebook and with some webinars here and masterclasses there, and just inviting, doulas, childbirth educators to just come and get to see what it is.
So do you primarily work online now in the coaching or supporting other doulas? Are you still?
Yeah, I'm doing a lot of online classes. Well, it helped that COVID kicked in, so everybody went online.
It changed people's perspective and understanding about accessing education and support online. Yeah.
So I actually have students in Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, Dubai, Qatar, Iceland, Japan.
Yeah, wonderful. It's really interesting what you describe about the transformational coaching. I have a similar approach in my work, and I didn't know that that's what it was called. I actually did some training with Birthing from Within to become a childbirth educator a few years ago. And I think that's perhaps when, I think it was probably only the second year into my work where I stopped turning up to my sessions and my relationships with clients in a role that I saw of, providing information. And I wasn't doing that. I don't really do that. I actually don't get a lot of satisfaction or joy out of that, because they can pick up a book and read if they want information.
And it's redundant nowadays when they have, as I said, Dr. Google, Dr. Facebook, and Dr. YouTube,
Yeah. So I do a lot of work as well. I always say birth is life and life is birth. And it's about it's really transformational work that I do with people as well. And it's very, very powerful and impactful. And sometimes in my prenatal sessions, we might not talk about birth at all. I might spend all of my prenatal sessions with a family and barely touch the topic of birth. Much more common for that to be the case if they're birthing at home than birthing in the hospital. But that may not be what's presenting as what that they need to work through at that time. So yeah, I find that it's really interesting to hear that, because I have a similar approach, but I've never sort of thought of a name for it or anything like that. And yeah, so perhaps you can just let us know as we finish up where you're going from here. So you've talked about your background and how you came to this work when you were still in Israel, and then you've moved to the US and through this crisis sort of reinvented yourself. So you're currently supporting students in different parts of the world with this transformational birth coaching. Where to from here? Where is your sort of business heading, or what does the future look like for you?
Yeah, well, I do have a new project sitting right now, cooking. So I think I would like to recruit doula trainers, anyone, like experienced doulas, seasoned doulas who's been in the field for quite some time, and they feel ready to build their legacy. And I would like to try and recruit them to become doula trainers that will work within the new framework and train within this new framework of birth coach method. So that it's not going to be only a continuing education, but that you will actually begin right from the beginning, from the get-go, with this type of approach.
Yeah.
Begin your doula career like that.
Yeah. So equipping people right from the start of their doula career to have a more impactful way of supporting families, really.
That's exactly my word. That's exactly. Be more impactful. Make a difference in someone's lives, Exactly.
So just to finish up, what's the name of your book, Neri?
The Art of Coaching for Childbirth. Do I have a copy here.
The art of coaching for childbirth. Beautiful. So I will share, obviously, in the show notes, the links to your website and other things. So thank you so much for chatting with me.
Lovely. It was such a pleasure talking to you. I feel like I can continue for hours.
Yes, that feels like that as well. And I'll share information of how listeners can learn more about you.
Thank you.
So thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity. It was a pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation today with me chatting with Neri of her diverse journey into the world of birth in Israel and how that's taken her to the United States, and through a crisis in her career has led her to pivot to supporting doulas and to continue now moving towards supporting doula trainers in the future. It was a really interesting conversation. I hope you enjoyed listening as well, and thank you for being on the Whole Doula podcast. Thanks so much for listening to the Whole Doula podcast with Mary Giordano. I hope you enjoyed listening to our conversation today. If so, please hit subscribe and consider leaving a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. I'll be back with another episode in 2 weeks. Have a beautiful day.